All right. Well, I'm
Mm.
ready to get started whenever you are.
Yeah, yeah, same. Well, I want to start off by thanking our patrons, which we haven't done in a while. We've got Malia, who's been with us for quite a while. We've got Karen.
And Emily.
I want to thank all of our patrons for this, and the rest of you know it's okay. You can be a Karen and join along with her and support us as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we want to thank our listeners who are maybe not able to pledge at this time, but are supporting us in other ways, especially leaving reviews or just liking us on whatever platform you use. Even the star ratings, even if you don't have to write anything, can be helpful in kind of putting our name out there a little bit more to pick up a few more listeners. And also, word of mouth is really useful. So if you know any Wheel of Time dorks who might be interested in these point of view deep dives that we do chapter by chapter, feel free to let them know. But without further ado, I'll get us started. So, welcome to Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. As I said, this is season 3, episode 5, and we are reading Nynaeve Almira's point of view this season. I'm your co host, Lajar Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Simmerus, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I do want to remind everyone the Wheel of Mind is an in depth character reread podcast. We will pull elements of the story from all throughout the book series. So if you've not read The Wheel of Time, we ask you to wait about listening to this podcast until you have, because this right now is the only spoiler warning you're going to get. Today we are examining The Shadow Rising, chapters 39 and 52. I'll get us started with chapter 39 entitled A Cup of Wine. Now, before I get into the chapter, I will let you know we're changing the format slightly here, um, in that Nynaeve has a very small point of view in this chapter, but I'm going to cover other events. Not something we typically do, but we're pretty much going to cover the entire chapter across two different points of view. So leading up to Nynaeve's point of view, which comes in at the end of the chapter, we're looking through Elaine Tracan's eyes as she and Nynaeve are brought into Tanchico aboard the seafolk vessel Wave Dancer. They've learned a lot about weaving air from the seafolk windfinders and actually taught them a few other things along the voyage. Then on the docks, they're surprised by the large number of very dangerous and hungry people who are milling around. Even Nynaeve is glad to have Julian and Tom with them. But soon they run into none other than Captain Bale Doman and finds out that he has an entire fleet of ships now, some that the authorities know about and a few that they don't. And he's becoming a fairly wealthy man. Bale tries to apologize to Nynaeve multiple times for having left them on the docks at Falma, but she practically ignores him until Elaine asks him about a place to stay in the city and then asks if he will help them. Bale Doman sets them up at an inn where the innkeeper's an old friend of his, and they talk business over lunch. To assuage his conscience over leaving them in Falma, he will have his men look for those Black Aja sisters in Tanchico. As well, he gave a lot of information to Tom and Julian about both the underground criminal element within the city and local politics, and the times that those two overlap. Later, Elaine finds that she's drunk too much wine in the common room while listening to Tom Maryland and begins to remember that she knew him and even pulled his mustaches when she was just a little girl. Staggering drunkenly back to her room, Nynaeve dunks Elaine's head into a bucket of water a couple of times, trying to sober her up enough to stand guard while Nynaeve goes into Tel'aran'rhiod looking for Egwene. Now, within Nynaeve's point of view, we see her waiting inside the Stone of Tyr, and she calls out to Egwene, but Egwene did not arrive. Nynaeve struggled for a bit to keep her clothes from changing away from those stout Two Rivers woolens, and even winds up with her old stick in her hand. She begins to wonder idly what Egwene was doing out there in the Aiel wastes, and within the blink of an eye, Nynaeve finds herself standing in the waste itself, looking down into a ruined city in a valley. There was a man there, probing at this strange wall of fog that surrounded the city, as if he were trying to understand it. Suddenly, Brigitta Silverbow caught Nynaeve's attention, and warned her to get away from there. She would be worse than dead if that man caught her here in Teleranriad. When Nynaeve started asking questions instead of leaving, Brigitta aimed an arrow at her. Nynaeve cursed and jumped away and found herself standing back in Emmons Field. She did catch a glimpse of Brigitta darting back behind a building, and Nynaeve stalked over to her, already beginning a tongue lashing, when she saw instead a man coming towards her. He looked so much like Lan that she stopped dead for a moment, even as he raised his own bow and aimed at her heart. Nynaeve barely ducked out of the way and woke up screaming with a shallow cut on her arm from the arrow, babbling to Elaine on how he looked so much like Lan, and yet he had tried to kill her. Elaine comforted her until they could both fall asleep. The next morning finds us back in Elaine's head, which pounded with a terrible hangover. Nynaeve had brewed her a cup of something that smelled terrible and tasted worse, but which seemed to help out a little bit. Then Julian came in after being out all night, and he and Tom did their best to dissuade Nynaeve and Elaine from going back out into the city. It was a terribly rough place, and anyway, the Black Sisters knew them, which made it twice as dangerous for them. But then some dressmakers arrived, and the ladies ignored the men and spent time talking about dresses, Tanchico hairstyles, and other ways to look like a native of the city.
One thing I pulled out from this chapter is that Nynaeve has a really hard time controlling her clothing in Tel'aran'rhiod, and she has to be especially effortful to conjure up the good Two Rivers wool. Like, she's always praising, but never really wears in real life anymore.
Right.
Um, even when she has more choice in her wardrobe. Now, lately, she's having to look like a native in disguise, just about everywhere they've been. But in the future, when she gets a little more autonomy with the wardrobe, she still prefers the silks and something a little more sexy than the Two Rivers wool.
Yeah.
But she has such a hard time controlling herself in Tel'aran'rhiod, and it's not just lack of experience in Tel'aran'rhiod. She knows how to will something to happen there, at least in terms of how she appears, and she practices that in the next chapter too. But she just doesn't have a lot of control over her feelings anyway. That's
Right.
kind of what we're seeing here, is that she's really sort of pulled along by a lot of her emotions, and Tel'aran'rhiod is just a cool place where you get to really see that visually.
Yeah.
And I think it would be an awesome opportunity for some really visual storytelling in a TV show. I don't know anything about how Tel'aran'rhiod is going to be incorporated, if at all even. Maybe people just get traveling a little earlier and hop around the world a lot more. I really don't know what's going to happen with that, but I think that there are many aspects to visual storytelling that really tell you something about a character on screen when you don't have the benefit of having all these words inside their head to do that, like we do in our point of view reads. Things like hairstyle changes or just specific costumes, and then you combine that with some of the musical motifs, and you really get the vibe of what's going on for this person. And I could really see us having such a sense of what like a roiling storm Nynaeve's emotions can be by seeing her costumes rapidly change on
Yes.
screen in
Yes.
Tel'aran'rhiod.
Because I'm still fascinated by how much she and Matt Cawthon are alike in many ways. And
Mm-hmm.
the, this Quicksilver emotional thing where it's almost as if her thoughts are jumping from place to place and thing to thing, but she
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really view that as a strength, and she won't even admit that to herself. But we do see the elements of that here in Tel'aran'rhiod, that she struggles worse than the other girls to maintain these things. She can imagine it, like you said, but maintaining it, and it is because of her flashes of temper and her thoughts of Lan and what that does to her. It leads almost
Mm-hmm.
subconsciously to the thoughts of some of the dresses she's seen women wear in Terabon and other places, and suddenly she's wearing that. So, and even when she firmly places herself in these stout Two River woolens, which I love the way they have to put the word stout in there every time. You picture it as
Mm-hmm.
being very matronly. Um, in my mind, I almost go to the Eastern European women with the kerchief over their hair and everything. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
really picture these gray, stout Two Rivers woolens, and and she gets the stick in her hand, the old stick that she used to, or was talked about in the first book. I don't recall
Mm-hmm.
ever seeing her use it on anyone, although it seemed like she may have shaken it at Sin Bowie. I can't recall, but at least she thought about it, or it's talked about her using it quite a lot and thumping people with it. So she winds up having that in her hand, and then she thought of how little good that would do her, and then it became almost a sword, and then she mentally puts it back there. So her thoughts are jumping around from place to place. Um, not so much those conscious thoughts rather, but the subconscious and the emotional things. Nynaeve is a woman who is very much ruled by her passions. And I do see that as a strength of hers in a way, but it's also a weakness because
Mhm.
it's someone who's very often ruled by their passions. It's easy to make that person angry, and then you can sort of steer them in a direction you want them to go. And other
Mhm.
emotions. If you can evoke the emotion, you can control the person to a degree. And she's very stubborn. She's not easily pushed or controlled, but it's very easy to make her feel things very good or very bad. You
Mm.
may regret doing it, but you you can drive her to anger if that's your goal. It can very, very well be done. Um,
Yeah, she's got buttons you can push, and they're pretty obvious.
yes.
And I love how quick she is to threaten just about anybody
Yes.
without knowing anything about them. I mean, she doesn't care at what risk to herself that might put her. She doesn't really have a filter. She threatens Brigitta Silverbow.
Yes.
She's like, "I'll hero you. I'll thump you so you think you've had an adventure." I love
Yes.
that.
Yes.
She is just so quick to hey, come back here. I'm gonna whop you with this stick if you
Right.
don't tell me what's going on.
Yes.
And she has no idea. I mean, tell her on Riyadh, she has no idea how this place works, and
Right.
this person could be any kind of threat to her,
Right.
and she doesn't care.
Right.
She just lets it fly.
It could be someone disguising themselves as Brigitta Silverbow. Now, she
Right?
she recognized Brigitta because at the end of the Great Hunt, she looked out. I think it was she, or maybe men, but I'm pretty sure it was Nynaeve who looked out and saw Brigitta actually riding her horse across the waves, firing arrows into
Yeah.
Xianchen's ship and setting it on fire. So,
Hmm.
um, and of course,
Great job saying Sean Chen Ship on the first try. That was incredible.
I'm surprised I didn't need to practice that a few times. But it was, a very, very cinematic scene there. And yeah, and if you recall when the heroes came back after the Horn of Villiers was blown, everyone recognized them and not only recognized who they were, but heard and saw the 100 different names that was attached to them from the different times they'd been spun out into the pattern. So, anyway, just one of those wonderful things. There was no doubt that this was Brigitta Silverbow, and now she sees her in Teleronriad, where you don't get that strange effect of seeing all these past lives and histories matched together in that person. But she would have that bit of recognition, not just from the stories, but from an eyewitness account of her own. She
Yeah.
just has to do that. She can never just be nice to someone if they've pushed her buttons. She cannot bring herself to do that.
Mm-mm. Nope. I mean, she was really working herself up to be able to
Yeah.
channel, and so she was really angry. She
Right.
was already just kind of in that zone.
Yes.
So
Well,
it doesn't really matter what comes across her path when she's in that mode.
right. And so I wonder how much of Nynaeve's anger here and her stomping around railing at Brigitte Silverbow is because she wants to be angry enough to channel, A, and
Mhm.
B, she subconsciously went to this safe place. I'm putting air quotes around that word, which is this
Mm-hmm.
Emmons Field. She's back home. Now, when she's back
Yeah.
home, she's the wisdom. She automatically falls into that role. Everybody is going to answer to her. Even though the mayor technically doesn't have to, he
Yep.
still does. So,
Mm-hmm.
between those two things, there's really no other way she can act. She's going to bring Brigitta into line here. Now, had she been
Mm-hmm.
somewhere else, she might have continued to question her or talk back or whatever, but I don't think she would have started in with the tongue lashing, at least as early, except she was in Emmons Field, and that's her home turf. And
That's a great
uh,
point. The context really matters.
yes, yes. And I don't know if that's why she went to Emmons Field or if that's just the place she felt safest. And so when
Hmm.
when Brigitta acts like she's going to fire an arrow at her, she automatically goes to someplace she feels safe, and then finds out that she's not safe there.
Yeah.
I kind of got a sense of how traumatic this was. Not just that someone tried to kill her or someone tried to kill her in the shadow world of Emmons Field, but it's someone who looked like Lan Mandragoran. And that,
Mhm.
she's babbling when she comes out. And that's not like Nynaeve to just babble. She's usually the one who is grabbing someone else, slapping them a time or two, and trying to get them to get control of yourself, snap out of it. But here, Nynaeve she's babbling because this was so emotionally traumatic to her. I think we've all had dreams sometimes where something, you experience some type of trauma within this dream. And of course, we know it's not real, but you wake up and you're still shaken from it. You can't really get that out of your head for a while. It takes a while to process these things. Um, I
Mhm.
guess a funny example, my wife one time woke up from a dream that I had been cheating on her, and she wouldn't talk to me for the entire day. She was angry at me. And it wasn't real. It was in the and
Mm.
she knew it was in the dream, but it's not about what
Yeah.
happens, it's about how it makes you feel. And it's hard to overcome that.
Yeah, those they
Yes.
feel so real.
Yes.
You know what you did.
And so, and that's just an
Yeah.
anecdotal thing. I'm sure everyone has had similar experiences where, something it the way it made you feel is so unsettling that you have a hard time getting over that. And that's what she experienced here, except we know what happens until Runriad happens. It's not like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens until Runriad you bring out with you. So she comes out with an arrow wound because she couldn't try to summon up any kind of defense. She couldn't weave anything to block the arrow quickly enough, which we know now that the person she saw was Slayer, and that he might have, you know, thought his arrow would puncture a shield or something anyway. So, weaving and using the one power might not have saved her there, but it's just quick reflexes and willing herself awake that saved her life. Um, but she woke up so shaken and so rattled from this because it's of how it made her feel that not someone tried to kill her, but someone who looks like the man she loves, the only man she's ever really loved. That's the one that tried to kill her. So it would
Mm.
be somewhat analogous to waking up and the person you love the most, you dreamed of them trying to kill you. That's somewhat analogous to what she
Mhm.
experienced here. And we see she was very she was in a bad place after this. It took her a while to kind of process this and get through it, as it would anyone.
Yeah, it really would. One thing I noticed in this chapter that Nynaeve doesn't get enough credit for is that she did admit that somebody else was
Right,
right about something
right.
and that
And
she was wrong. um, yeah, the men explained that she and Elaine shouldn't go searching for the Black Aja because they know the Black Aja knows what they look like, and they'd be too recognizable. People would be looking for them. And Elaine was about to open her mouth to argue about it, and then Nynaeve said, "No, you're right.
yes,
That's a really good point. I guess we'll stay put." And yeah, we don't ever think of
right.
Nynaeve as a person who's willing to admit when she's wrong because there's many, many, many other times that she does not. But we got to give her credit for this time.
Exactly, because I'm pretty sure I can count on the fingers of one foot how many times she says that other than this in this story.
You know, you'd be surprised. I just did the notes for next week, and I think I found
Wow.
another one.
Well,
So
a-
yeah,
and
we'll see.
yeah, and one of the things that I guess a caveat to this, she does tell them they're right, but she's already got a backup plan. Now she's still um she's not saying you're right, I'll stay in the inn and hide, which is what they're trying to get her to do.
Well,
But, "Well, you're right,
true,
we're too
true.
recognizable." So then the dressmakers come in and, it's talking about putting their hair up and all these little braids, in the Tanchika
Yeah.
style, so she's already thought of that, and I almost hear it in a smarmy voice when I hear Zoe Robbins doing a smarmy or snarky voice when she says, "You're right." Whether that actually makes it into the show or not, I don't know or care. I still try to picture the actors playing these parts and saying the lines. And yeah, I hear her doing it in a very smart aleck tone. "Well, you're right." And
Hmm.
because now the dressmakers
Well,
are
yeah.
coming in. Again, that's my imagination, but that to me adds more to the story as we go. But yeah, she did say it, and she doesn't do that often. But she will be more likely to admit that someone else is right, either if she feels like she's indebted to them, which again is not often, or in a case like this where she's going to one up them. Yes, you're right. But watch this. She pulls
Yeah.
that ace out of her sleeve, so to speak.
Yeah, she really does. Thank you for filling in that context. Those were pretty much the end of my notes on this
Yeah,
chapter. What about
yeah,
you?
mine as well. It's a
Okay.
fairly good chapter, fairly rich with things, but we just only had this small glimpse of Nynaeve's point of view, and I expanded, and just included the entire chapter, which is not something we
Yeah.
typically do, but I felt like that was the only way to put it into context. Now, your chapter,
Occasionally, it really is needed.
right,
Yeah.
now your chapter is one that definitely sticks in my mind between rereads, and so I'm eager to hear you
Hmm.
get into that.
All right. Well, chapter 52, Need, finds Nynaeve beaming into Tel'aran'rhiod to find Egwene, to look for Egwene again. She was fuming, having recently learned that her new friend Egyonin was Shan-Chan. Her outfit flickered a few times so that when Egwene and the Wise One showed up, faintly due to being in the saddle, Nynaeve was wearing an armored dress and holding a spiked mace that she quickly transformed into Two Rivers wool and a good walking stick. Egwene updated Nynaeve on Rand's push toward Alcair Dal to consolidate the clans and fulfill prophecy, but she was most concerned that she could not honor her promise to Elaine to watch over him. Nynaeve comforted her and told her of their little progress in Tanchico. She asked the Wise Ones for any dream tricks, like if she could get into Amather's dreams to find out if the new Panarch was a dark friend, or if she could bring her into Tel'aran'rhiod to do that. But they only mocked her by forcing her to appear in children's clothes when they thought her unheeding of the danger of being in someone else's dream under their control, or of the evil of bringing somebody into Tel'aran'rhiod. The Wise Ones seemed exasperated with both Egwene and Nynaeve trying to use powers of which they knew too little. But Nynaeve demanded, so Amis explained how to concentrate on need to find what one is looking for in the world of dreams. But this could take a person directly to dangers just as real as those in a waking world. Nynaeve was approaching the end of her hour, after which Elaine was supposed to wake her up, so she and Egwene promised to meet up in 7 days, by which time they expected their stories to be neatly wrapped up. Rand would have consolidated the Aiel clans behind him, and Nynaeve and Elaine would have tied up the Black Aja sisters and have them awaiting trial. Nynaeve tried using this new method of need after first disguising herself as their innkeeper Rendra, and found herself in the Panarch's bedchamber, seeing the woman being tortured and humiliated by Tamila Kinderota, one of the Black Aja known for her sadism. She quickly concentrated on what she needed to find a thing that they could use to hurt Rand, and found herself in a serene museum. No apparent dangers here, so she could keep blindly concentrating on need. But then she saw a mist-clad woman she did not know, but felt she should for some reason. She didn't fit the description of any of the Black Aja sisters they were hunting, but Nynaeve found her fist gripping her braids of its own accord every time she looked at or thought about the woman. And then it all came rushing back to her, the compulsion in their room at the inn, and she was angry enough to channel. But just then, Brigitta showed up and directed her to a nearby room, and when Nynaeve looked back, the mist-clad woman had disappeared. She followed Brigitta, demanding to know why she had interrupted Nynaeve's chances at teaching that woman a lesson. But Brigitta explained that the woman they saw was Moghedien, and that Brigitta herself is indeed one of the heroes of the Horn, bound to the wheel, hanging out in Tel'aran'rhiod until spun out in rebirth or called by the Horn Sounder. It's not so simple, though. She can't help fight the Forsaken, as Nynaeve asked her to, and she really shouldn't even be talking to her according to some vaguely referred to precepts. Guidal Kane appeared and backed up this claim about the precepts, ignoring Nynaeve all the while, though. Nothing good ever came from violating those precepts before, he reminded Brigitta. But Brigitta insisted to Nynaeve and Guidal that she could not stand idly by when evil was on the rise, such as this. The shadow is rising, if you will. But she's not so sure what she could do to help, as she has less power in the world of dreams even than Nynaeve. So she explained all she could about Moghedien's personality, strategy, and abilities, and about their history together. Namely, that Moghedien promised her she would weep alone for as long as the wheel turns. And yet Brigitta was willing to help however she could. After Brigitta and Guidal left, Nynaeve summoned her anger and Saidar and materialized back in the museum to investigate. She found the item she thought Moghedien had been smiling at, one of the Quendiar seals to the Dark One's prison, and what looked like a set of bracelets and a necklace when she concentrated even more on need. When she described to Elaine what she had found after waking up, they concluded it must be a male Adom meant to control Rand, although Egyanan insisted such a thing had never been made. They decided it must be destroyed. Just then, a commotion arose outside their room where Julian and Doman dispatched some would-be thieves that had attacked Tom. The women realized that during all of this, when they step outside to investigate, they were still in their shifts, and the men were looking at them really appraisingly, especially Doman eyeing Egyanan. When the men got their eyes back on the men who had attacked them, no, Julian discovered that one of the guys was someone who had tried to rob him earlier in the day, and it probably wasn't just a coincidence. Egyanan corroborated that by saying that this guy was Shan Chan, and he was after her. She advised slitting his throat right then and there. Nynaeve slowed everybody down a little bit and instead asked the men to leave him in an alley. Once the women were alone, Nynaeve laid out her plans to get them into the Panarch's palace, and thus ends chapter 52, Need.
But this scene in the Panarch's museum, which I know is only a small part of the chapter you just read, but that's the one that always catches my attention. Now here the male Adom is it's sort of talked about, it's hinted at, but it really plays a small part of what we see now. It's several books before we see just what happened with that thing and how
Yeah.
close the entire world came to unraveling, and how that moment changes Egyanan's trajectory for the rest of the story. But right here, we know it's important. We don't know exactly how important. Basically, if you can get it out of the hands of the Dark Friends and Mogadine, then it's a non-issue, and that's kind of what you expect, what you see to happen here. Um, but then tied into that is her seeing Mogadine and breaking through that compulsion. And I have to say that is one of the moments when you want to stand up and cheer for Nynaeve, because she can be very prickly and very thorny personality, someone who really gets under your skin, because she does get angry so quickly, because she typically goes for the stick rather than the carrot when she's dealing with someone. She wants to boss and bully her way through very many situations. And it takes her a while to get out of that. But here you see that strong will that she has as being a plus. You see where it is something good in her life, because even though this wasn't a deep compulsion, it wasn't a rewriting of the person's personality the way many of the Forsaken do at times. This is just a very light one to you forget about this event, forget about what I said after I've questioned you and got the information I need. But she's able to break free of that. And it's something you don't see very often in this series. We even
Mm-hmm.
when um, Queen Morghese broke free of her compulsion from Gabriel, she continually wanted to go back to him later on. It's as though the tendrils of that was still in her mind, and she couldn't quite shake it. She could shake the worst of the effects, but it was always still there. It was almost like a drug addiction. It was constantly there gnawing at her. She was just able to push it into the background and go ahead with her life and do some very good positive things. But here with Nynaeve, once Nynaeve breaks that, it's gone. In fact, any uh, friendship or whatever that was placed there in that light compulsion has turned into enmity, and she will hurt the woman if she can.
Yeah.
And we see that she's not afraid of her, the one person Nynaeve should be afraid of, and she's not. So I know that gets us into things that happen in the future. At this point, it's just seeing her in the museum and finding out who she is. But I love this moment. I love this scene. I love what it builds up to and what we will see later on in their interactions. In fact, they are in the museum again. But it really shows that even though her breaking free of this was a subconscious thing, it was not a conscious decision. It was not something that someone else helped her with. This was pure Nynaeve Almira, and it shows her grit and her stubbornness and how that can become a strength. And we discussed before how she is good at lying to herself, but this time that paid off. It's almost as if she was able to I guess you said so much practice at thinking one thing and saying another, that she was able to kind of use that to manipulate these thoughts and break free of that compulsion. I'm not sure that that's what did it, but that just was kind of analogous in my
Mm-hmm.
mind to the way she constantly tries to deceive herself,
Mm.
but it gave her the strength to overcome when someone else tried to
That's a
deceive
really
her.
great point. I think this kind of double layer of the way she tends to live did help her out here. And I did not think about it in that context. I was thinking that just the fact that her anger is so strong and was present in both these situations, and it comes from a much more unconscious level, that her anger was there to send her that clear message. But I think you're very right that she's so used to shoving stuff down and having stuff in denial and like having something on some kind of deeper layer where she's not aware of it, that she was more easily able to store this kind of muscle memory. And Matt is somebody who does that kind of stuff too. Not quite to the same degree, but some of the things that he does are muscle memory type things. Like a lot of his old memories from having the holes in his memories filled are musical. And that's not a very conscious type of memory. I mean, you could consciously recall song lyrics if you wanted to, but oftentimes it just pops up into your
Right.
head. Even if you don't want to remember songs, you remember a lot of them. So
Right.
I think they're both kind of similar in that way, living this with kind of this some kind of duality or layers going on compared to some of our other characters who are a little more
Yes.
straightforward. And that's one thing I really love about this chapter
Right.
too. And next episode is where we get a lot deeper into their enmity, and they have an ongoing enemy relationship for several books that's really interesting. And Nynaeve's kind of moral dilemmas that she goes through in her interactions with Mogideon is something I'm really looking forward to exploring. But it all just really starts here. Nynaeve is just purely angry, and she's ready to do anything about it. She doesn't have any plans about what the boundaries are or anything. But in the future, she kind of pumps the brakes when she's really in a situation to have power over Mogideon, and she kind of wavers back and forth about what to do about it. So yeah, really looking
Right.
forward to that. But at this point, Nynaeve doesn't have great control over herself. So that's really, I guess, part of how her anger was able to arise unbidden and really let her know what was going on and that, who this person was, what she'd done to her in the past. But we have some of the more benign examples of that here too that are showing up once again in the very beginning of the chapter where it's a little bit of a lighter tone. Nynaeve has really poor control over herself until Riyadh again, and she's also
Yes.
still in denial about it. She pretended when she was called out on it that she intended to have that dress of armor on, which I love. Just played it off like it was on purpose.
Yes.
She finally
Right.
admitted, at least to herself, on some level, that she didn't know what she was doing when the wise ones put her in the little girl's clothes, the little Aiel girl clothes. And she
Yes.
she was so frustrated, and I didn't notice this until I really combed through on multiple reads, that she was just about to ask for advice or help right before they changed her back, which would have been really funny to see Nynaeve have to be humiliated to ask for help in that way, because we know that's not something she really does.
Right. Right. Oh no, not willingly. Now she probably would have never let them forget it once
Yeah.
once they helped her. But yeah, she can be broken at that point. She can bring herself to humble herself enough to ask someone for something, but it's not often, and then she usually makes them regret it.
Yeah.
It's
It seems like they knew
there
right where
again,
the
just
limit was so that they wouldn't completely
right,
make her go
right,
nuclear, but that they would take her down a peg, maybe.
and she did need that. She needed to see that
Yeah,
that
she was
even though
being
she
pretty rude.
right, right, that even though she's powerful and she's gifted, she needs to learn how to deal with other people and how to control herself more. And yeah, she's not yet
Yeah.
achieved that.
Well, I mean, she even after that incident, she was still pretty rude with them. She thought she was really toning it down. She thought she was begging them for help.
Yes.
And Amis called her out saying that I said, you make a request sound like a demand, which Nynaeve was just puzzled by. She's like,
Yeah.
what are you saying? I was begging.
Yes.
And, even Even though earlier in the same paragraph she was just telling herself that she needed to be firm with them. So on some level she knew that's what she was doing. But when called out on it, oh no 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 no, that's not at all what I was doing.
Right.
She really walked it back in her mind. She didn't
Right.
even
It did.
say any of that out
Yeah.
loud, but she's just full of these contradictions,
Yeah.
as we know.
And that seems very familiar to me. I think she does that several times during the story when she's in her mind
Probably.
practically begging someone something and for something, and they, well, you're coming on a little strong there, aren't you? Being a little bossy, yeah, something to that effect. And it seems
Mhm.
like over and over again we catch that in the story. So again, there's a very huge disparity between how she views herself and her words and how other people perceive those. There's a very big
Absolutely.
difference between those.
And she still didn't understand that why they looked at her weird when she cautioned them to watch Egwene closely. She was like, Egwene has no regard for safety, rules, anything. She just wants to learn and she's going to go nuts with it. So you
Yes.
really got to keep an eye on her. And then they're looking at her like, oh, you think Egwene needs to be watched? Which the funny thing is, like, Nynaeve is not wrong. Egwene really does need to be watched. She's
Yeah.
going behind the wise ones' backs, and she's always doing stuff that's dangerous to herself. It's something that Varen pointed out about her very early on, that she would just, she was at risk of burning herself out or something because she just kind of forges ahead without thinking about whether something she sees on the horizon is like a cliff that she's going to run right off of.
Right.
And she never really learns to temper that, which is one reason I think why she, her story burns so bright but so shortly,
Yeah.
so bright and so short. Because I think one way or the other, if she hadn't done it in some kind of heroic way, she would have exhausted or burnt out herself
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah. She could have.
So Nynaeve is very right about that, but Nynaeve also needs to check herself or have somebody
Oh, yeah.
watching her.
Yeah. Oh, yes. That would be like, Matt coughing, trying to tell someone to use some tact, or
Yeah.
yeah, Rand telling someone to control their temper. Just yeah, there's a lot of just dramatic irony here, and that very much
Yeah.
that's a very beautiful example of it here with Nynaeve. Yeah, tell her to be careful. She doesn't really know what she's doing, and you could just see that flat stare they would give her. So anyway, some fun things. That's all the comments I have on this.
Mhm.
Now I do have one little tidbit that is we're still on topic with Nynaeve, but I'm going to break the timeline a little bit.
Mm.
Something I caught that we discussed a couple of episodes ago. Remember when Nynaeve reached for the source, and I was kind of amazed that she imagined a, a flower on, I think, a white blossom on a black thorny bush,
Yes.
and
Hmm.
then you brought us back to during her time as or going through the accepted test, where she had the thorns all the way through her hands, and I found the genesis of this, of when she first started imagining a blackthorn bush as the flower that opens up to the light. And it goes all the way back to when they were leaving Faldara, and
Hmm.
and Varen, uh, Varen Mathwin was the first Aes Sedai to come in to Nynaeve and Egwene's tent to
Is that when
teach
she
them.
sets the blankets on fire?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I had a hunch it was somewhere back there and not
yes,
actually in her point of view, but I wasn't sure.
right. And they're trying to get Egwene to do the exercises too, and she kind of begrudgingly sits there and tries to clear her mind and become the flower. And Varen said, even a blackthorn bush has flowers. And so it's
Mm.
almost as if Varen subconsciously puts that image in her mind. That
Yep, she
Nynaeve
kind
is
of planted
already,
it.
yes, she's already angry, so she grabs onto that image, and that's the flower she pictures herself as opening up to the sunlight. From that point on, that's the image she has in her mind, and it works for her. It just doesn't work for her every time. And we saw how her anger, became that block that kept it from happening for so long. But when she was having to go through those first exercises, those novice exercises, Varen said blackthorn bush. Even a blackthorn bush has flowers. And I think she was referencing Nynaeve's prickly nature at that point,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing how that would become an integral part of Nynaeve channeling. So I thought that was really cool that I ran across that in my reread just right after our last discussion on it. Well, I hope everyone will join us next time for Season 3, Episode 6, when we'll cover The Shadow Rising, chapters 54 and 55.
Wheel of Mind is written by Lajara and Giskel and produced by Lajara. Our original theme music was composed by Wendigo. You can find his Lairs EP on SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube, and those links will be in the episode description. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the Wheel of Mind, but this is an ending. To catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. You can also find our episodes on YouTube under the channel name Lajara Dane. That's LaJaradayne. To leave feedback, rate and review on whichever platform you use to listen to us, or contact us at lajaradane@gmail.com or at mind_wheel on Twitter. To support the show, subscribe to us on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/wheelofmind.
Well, and I had promised to watch one episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 with him, and I wanted to do it before the podcast because it seems like I'm always just putting him off. Oh, let's do it after this and after that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, I put him first this time. I shouldn't have because it messed with your schedule. But
I mean, he's the kid you still got at home that needs you more. So, I get it. And happy Father's Day.
Thank you. Thank you. It has been a good one. It's been a good week. I hope yours was.
Yeah. Yeah, it has. We were cleared by the pest control company for fleas. They said we don't have them anymore. I don't have any bites, even though I'm off of my steroid and stuff. And I was their favorite target. So there's definitely no adult fleas anywhere else in this house, or else I would know it. And I don't have to vacuum every single day anymore. Although my allergies actually have been fantastic. Almost no symptoms because I was getting rid of all the allergens in the house, I guess, so often. There was no cat hair anywhere in the house except on the cat because, I vacuumed curtains, rugs, every level of this 8-foot tall cat tree, or more like 7-foot tall cat tree. The couch, taking the couch apart, the bed. I was washing the bed sheets every day and taking off the zipper mattress cover and vacuuming the mattress and the box spring. And so now I don't have to do that all the time, although I may just vacuum more often than I did pre-fleas because of how much it helped my allergies.
Yeah.
So
you just don't want to do it 3 times a day, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So, maybe like once a week or something. Might actually do that. And things are good here. Boots gets outside time on her harness now. She had gotten to where I think she gained a little too much weight to fit in it, so it was difficult to keep her occupied during her stay indoors since we had the fleas. We've been keeping her indoors full time. But now I take her out on the harness in the morning and in the evenings, and she especially loves it in the mornings, right around sunrise. So we both watch the sunrise and birds together first thing in the morning usually now.
Cool.
And she doesn't walk next to me where I go like a dog. She plops down where she wants to be. And walks where she wants to go, and sometimes tries to jump over the fence in the backyard. But with the harness on her, it's pretty easy for me to get her down. So she doesn't get to get on top of the garage anymore like she used to. I think she misses that part. But for the most part, she's handling it pretty well, and I keep her occupied enough with outside trips and several play sessions and everything that she is tired enough to sleep through the night without bothering us, and sleeps with us now too. So last night she's gotten so used to this routine and she loves it, compared to sleeping out in the living room by herself. She Friday night she was really tuckered out. I spent a total of like 3 hours just engaging her in play and outdoor stuff throughout the day. And she went over to my little bedroom lamp while I was reading in bed and fiddled with it like she was trying to turn it off, which I know she wasn't just playing with it for the noise or whatever, because in the morning sometimes she will play with the lamp because she knows that's the signal we're waking up, right? She tries to turn the lamp on. She doesn't know how to work it, but she tried to. So she was telling me it was bedtime. She was trying to turn off the lamp, and then she went over to the other side of the room where the fan sits on top of the dresser and fiddled with the fan because always turns it on for us to go to bed to have the noise. So she was telling us it was bedtime, and then she curled up in her little cat bed at my feet at the foot of the bed, and then she started meowing really loudly so across the house could hear her and know that he was supposed to come to bed too. So and this is at like 8:30. She was tuckered out. She's like, hey, it's bedtime. Everybody come here. We need the whole family together. So she's pretty clever now, and she
Yeah.
likes our little routines. And I'm very much a creature of habit too, so we
Right.
work very well together like that.
Oh, she almost has y'all trained. Yes. I love it.
Right?
I love it.
Yep, yep.
That is
Um,
so cool.
yeah, so and she still loves the car too, even after her big poop
Ah,
accident.
yeah.
The one of the last times we went out, just Friday, I took her out on a little trip to
Mhm.
when I did Walmart grocery pickup and
Yeah.
dropped off a package. So I didn't have to like leave her in the car at any point. It was just times we were
Right.
just
Right.
hanging out in the car together, and she seemed to like that just fine. It was about a little 2 hour trip, and she's my little travel buddy. She doesn't, even if I open the carrier, she doesn't go anywhere dangerous like while I'm driving. She doesn't ever try to
Right.
go at my feet. She doesn't like climb up on my head or anything. She stays put in the
Right.
seat.
Okay.
She likes to look out the windows when we stop at traffic lights and stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, she's chill to just sit there, just be a little
Okay.
passenger. So,
Wow.
um, and she likes her carrier, so if she ever feels insecure, she will go back in the carrier anyway and just
Right.
kind
Right.
of sleep there. So, um,
That's awesome. That's awesome.
yeah,
Well,
so
yeah,
she's my little travel buddy. I love it. We're used to
yeah,
being together 24/7 now, so I don't if there's not a reason I have to leave her at home, I just take her with me.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so that's all that's going on here. It's just me being
yeah.
obsessed with my cat as usual. That's pretty much it.
Oh me. Yeah, we had a good time over at mom and dad's today.
Yeah.
I just got him a pocket knife, but I got him
Hmm.
I can send you a picture of it later. I guess it's a Schrade that it actually only has one blade that's a knife blade. All the others are little
Hmm.
wood carving blades with weird shapes to them, little scoops and stuff.
Oh.
So if you're carving wood, and he was looking at that and he said, I will use that today. He said, I had one of these old curled sticks and I was wanting to carve a snake onto it. He said, I'll do it with this. So
Nice.
it was
Well, that's good. He's
pretty
still able
appreciative.
to do stuff like that. I know, like
Oh
after his last surgery, he doesn't get out and do as much physical work, but I'm
yeah,
glad he's still
right.
working with his hands
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. He just still tires out very quickly, very quickly.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
he never has regained to where he was before the surgery as far as endurance and strength.
Right.
And most people do better after open heart surgery, but
Yeah.
it just I guess just took so much out of his body. But
Hmm.
yeah, he does stay busy most of the time. He's working on some kind of little project, and uh,
Good.
he got him this heavy canvas apron with little pockets in the front, a work
Hmm.
work apron.
Yeah.
And Mom said that'll be so good because he comes in covered in sawdust and chips. And she said, but I bet that would work in the kitchen too. I can get him to go in there and cook for me.
Right?
Yeah, and we had a pretty fun time. So. And part of that is because she had already thought that she's defenseless until Iran Riyadh. The only
Right.
two things you can do is channel or run. Now, that's
Hmm.
not true, but that's Nynaeve's
Well, that's true.
perception
Yeah.
of it. That's what Nynaeve
Right.
thinks,
She doesn't know any better.
right? We find out later in the book with Perrin's famous line, "It's just a weave, Egwene," that even the one power is not as powerful as just belief and knowing who you are and this changing the world around you with your thoughts within Tel'aran'rhiod. The
Hmm.
one power is weaker than Tel'aran'rhiod itself in that zone when you're there.
Yeah.
Just the ability
Yeah.
to
Some
control
people
gravity
think
is
that's
stronger.
because the weaves are actually not real there. Like they're your imagination
Right, right,
also.
right, and
But I'm not sure if that's true. I think there's really not enough evidence one way or the other, but
yeah,
that would be one way of explaining why channeling is weak there
right,
because it's not real weaves. It's just kind of your will being exerted on the
right.
environment. Um,
You're
yeah.
yeah, you're imagining the weaves, so you're making them appear, and if someone else can imagine something stronger, they can overcome it. Yeah, I could see that,
Yeah.
and your expectations. It's just as if when you
Hmm.
drop something from your hand, you expect it to fall to the floor. So it does in Tel'aran'rhiod. If you were thinking
Yeah.
about it, you could let go of your sword and it would zip straight up into the sky if that's what you wanted it to do. But when you're not
Right.
thinking about it, just your typical expectations. So someone who has been channeling for years, they expect this weave to have this effect. And so it does. So yeah,
Hmm.
I think that's probably a fairly plausible explanation of how things work in Tel'aran'rhiod, as much as we can understand
Hmm.
it. but
It really is an overpowered environment.
yeah,
I think you really have to nerf it in order to use it effectively in a
yeah,
story. I think it's one of those things that Brandon Sanderson, for example, would probably not invent in any of his worlds.
right,
So here, like Robert Jordan limits it with the character's knowledge.
right,
Like the characters just don't know how to use it.
yeah,
It is an overpowered tool, but we just limit what the characters know so then it doesn't screw up the story. It doesn't
right,
break it.
right,
Brandon Sanderson tends to be the one who takes any kind of technology in his books and he exploits every cool little niche of some creative way that you could use it.
right, right.
He squeezes every drop out of what you could do with channeling, like the weird gateway stuff that
Yeah,
Andral did in A Memory of Light, right?
absolutely.
So just really thinks outside of the box. So I think he's not the type of writer who would ever really set up this type of overpowered tool because his instinct is going to be to just exploit
Right.
it, squeeze every drop out of what the thing can do,
Yeah,
and instead of just limiting it with what the characters can. No, the characters are going to max it out.
right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But
I think that Tel Run Riyadh is presented in a way that captures a lot of the relatable things that many of us experience in dreams, and this is definitely one of those that I hadn't focused as much on because it's such a small line that doesn't really come back up. I mean, it does in that we know Sam becomes a huge deal in Perrin's story, but it doesn't really
right.
come back up for Nynaeve. Um, which is an interesting part of this story. Many of the characters have little pieces of the puzzle for the other character storylines that they never
Right.
actually get to directly talk to each
Yeah.
other about, but the reader has. So you have this frustration of, I wish they knew
Yes.
about this.
Yes.
Um,
Well, it's not just one or two things. It is constantly throughout the story, over and over again. We get these bits of
of
information.
course.
I've just started sort of a casual re-listen. I don't know that I'm going all the way through the series, but I just finished The Great Hunt, and
Yeah.
uh, it's like the fact that after Matt has sounded the horn, Baalzamon tells Rand, he thought Rand sounded the horn. He said, "Well, you're tied to it now. No one else can bring back the heroes except you." And someone else had that bit of information. I don't remember who it was, but basically everyone except Matt knows that, or everyone who needs to know other than Matt knows that. Or I remember the other one was the High Lord Turok who said
Hmm.
something about it. So yeah,
Ah,
this
yeah.
two or three people have access to that information, but Matt does not. So it's like the person who needs that info doesn't have it. And you see that over and over and over again throughout the series. And I think I think that does sort of build a healthy frustration with the story because it keeps you intrigued, it keeps you involved, it
Yeah.
keeps your mind going, what if? What if you could have done this and this and added these things to the story? And I really enjoy that. I think it continues to draw the reader in, just like the wonderful sceneries that we imagine as we read the story and have described to us, just as so many elements of the story draw us in, the deep histories that we see, especially in Rudion, and the glimpses of the future that we see throughout so many different books here. Those things continue to intrigue and draw us in and make this story so rich. I really enjoy discussing things like that. And I'm starting to get off topic. It's something that came to me in finishing up The Great Hunt. Um, we've discussed before how there is the saying that starts in the eye of the world and continues all the way through a memory of light, that no one can walk so long in the shadow that they can't come back to the light.
Hmm.
And we've also discussed we only remember two people with which that happened, and that was Lord Ingtar of House Shinoa and Varen Matthew.
Hmm.
That's the only two dark friends we could recall, at least within the story, who came back to the light. And both of those were there with Rand at the flickering portal stone incident.
Yes.
So they both saw multiple, thousand different possible lifetimes, other decisions that they could have made in these worlds of what if, and they saw how that affected them. And at Ingtar's last stand, when he and Rand are standing there talking, and he basically reveals to Rand that he was a dark friend, he said in that portal stone, when Varen took us through the portal stone, because he never did know that Rand could channel.
Yeah.
He said, when Varen took us through the portal stone, I lived other lives, and I never got to use the horn in any of them. Some of them I got to touch it, I never got to sound it. And he went through basically these different scenarios that he went through. And in every one of those, the shadow took him deeper and deeper and deeper.
Mm.
And then I got to wondering about Varian. Varian had been sort of a double agent for
Mm-hmm.
years, but she would have experienced some similar things as
Yeah.
well. That seeing not just what I've done walking in the shadow, but what I'm going to be compelled to do. Where is it going to take me into the future? So both of those saw that, and that helped convince them to come back to the
Oh,
light.
I'm sure.
Because as long as they could rationalize, well, I'm just going to do this one thing. I'm going to try to save my people, or I'm going to try to study the dark friends. Those were excuses that they used to continue walking in darkness. But once the dark side has its clutches in you, it doesn't let go, and they will always compel you to do more, to go further, to go darker, until you do things you never intended to, never would have dreamed of doing. And and it's just that fact of seeing the end result of where it's going to lead me, I think, that helped those 2 to really change. And it just got me to thinking, in my life, in everyone's life, if we could just get a glimpse of where our decisions would take us, I think we would all be better people. We would all make a lot better decisions. It may not be this heroic last stand. It may not be sacrificing our life in order to reveal the secrets of the dark ones and his followers, but it would be things that would make the world a better place if we just could see where our decisions would take us. Because that our fault is just like theirs. We make bad decisions sometimes, and then we keep going with that. The one bad decision leads to another, until it takes us to a dark place that we would never want to go. It makes us into people we would never want to be. And I just wish, I guess, more of us, myself included, could get those glimpses of what my life could be, so I can do some better things and be a better person.
Mm. I really like that. I think too that those 2 characters had some of the kind of a predisposition to have been most affected by those glimpses anyway. I think
Yeah,
somebody like any of the Forsaken probably could have been, by the time we know them in the story, too arrogant and
yeah,
believing that
right,
they could avoid all those outcomes anyway. Like, oh, I wouldn't be stupid enough to do it that
right,
way. um, and I
right,
think that they both turned to the shadow for motivations that were not selfish and evil in the first place. Whereas, like the
right.
Forsaken, they just wanted power. They're very cartoonish villains. We kind of talked about it in a way. They're a little bit less interesting in their
Yeah,
motivations. You need big bad in an epic fantasy story like this. But you start to see that as the dominoes of the Forsaken fall, they're not even like the scariest type of dark friend. It's somebody like Varen who could have
right.
been under your nose the whole time. Or
Yeah,
Ingtar, who
yes,
really, could have lost you the horn forever. Those types of things. But what Varen and Ingtar both had were just kind of, I guess, sympathetic motivations to start with. And if they felt like there were any other paths in life that would satisfy those motivations, they would take those. It was not a desire to get anything that the Shadow was really promising them. I think Ingtar was trying to do anything he could to make peace with a force that from what he understood, was going to overtake all of the world anyway, and the Borderlands first. And he wanted to
right,
be able to save some of his people. He wanted to negotiate with them. Varen,
right, right,
Varen thought she could do some good by studying them. Probably just a lot of curiosity, and then thought later that she could do some good with the book. But both of them, if they felt like there was a better way to do either of those things, they would have done it. And I think
right, right,
they got to see more corroboration of that with the Portal Stone
right,
lifetimes. But if it had been different people who'd gone through those Portal Stones, they still may not have been affected by them in the same way.
right. Oh, exactly. It was those 2 because, Taverin. It's like,
Right.
that's my best loyal interpretation.
Yeah.
I can't do that deeper voice, but yeah, or I said interpretation, impersonation, my best loyal impersonation. I just can't do a voice that deep. But yeah, just the Taverin Webb brought up the 2 dark friends who could be changed. I think that was not the only thing, but I think that was a big catalyst in changing their story arc and bringing them back to the light. So,
Hmm.
and I just found that very comforting that it was because they saw some of the end results of their actions. And yeah, so let's do something better. It's something that came to me in finishing up the Great Hunt. Um, we've discussed before how there is the saying that starts in the eye of the world and continues all the way through a memory of light, that no one can walk so long in the shadow that they can't come back to the light.
Mm-hmm.
And we've also discussed we only remember two people with which that happened, and that was Lord Ingtar of House Shinoa and Varen Mather.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only two dark friends we could recall, at least within the story, who came back to the light. And both of those were there with Rand at the flickering portal stone incident.
Yes.
So they both saw multiple, 1,000 different possible lifetimes, other decisions that they could have made in these worlds of what if, and they saw how that affected them. And at Ingtar's last stand, when he and Rand are standing there talking, and he basically reveals to Rand that he was a dark friend, he said in that portal stone, when Varen took us through the portal stone, because he never did know that Rand could channel.
Yeah.
He said, when Varen took us through the portal stone, I lived other lives, and I never got to use the horn in any of them. Some of them I got to touch it, I never got to sound it. And he went through basically these different scenarios that he went through. And in every one of those, the shadow took him deeper and deeper and deeper.
Mm.
And then I got to wondering about Varian. Varian had been sort of a double agent for
Mm-hmm.
years, but she would have experienced some similar things as
Yeah.
well. That seeing not just what I've done walking in the shadow, but what I'm going to be compelled to do. Where is it going to take me into the future? So both of those saw that, and that helped convince them to come back to the
Oh,
light.
I'm sure.
Because as long as they could rationalize, well, I'm just going to do this one thing. I'm going to try to save my people, or I'm going to try to study the dark friends. Those were excuses that they used to continue walking in darkness. But once the dark side has its clutches in you, it doesn't let go, and they will always compel you to do more, to go further, to go darker, until you do things you never intended to, never would have dreamed of doing. And and it's just that fact of seeing the end result of where it's going to lead me, I think that helped those two to really change. And it just got me to thinking, in my life, in everyone's life, if we could just get a glimpse of where our decisions would take us, I think we would all be better people. We would all make a lot better decisions. It may not be this heroic last stand. It may not be sacrificing our life in order to reveal the secrets of the dark ones and his followers, but it would be things that would make the world a better place if we just could see where our decisions would take us. Because that our fault is just like theirs. We make bad decisions sometimes, and then we keep going with that. The one bad decision leads to another, until it takes us to a dark place that we would never want to go. It makes us into people we would never want to be. And I just wish, I guess more of us, myself included, could get those glimpses of what my life could be, so I can do some better things and be a better person.
Mm. I really like that. I think too that those two characters had some of the kind of a predisposition to have been most affected by those glimpses anyway. I think
Yeah,
somebody like any of the Forsaken probably could have been, by the time we know them in the story, too arrogant and
yeah,
believing that
right,
they could avoid all those outcomes anyway. Like, oh, I wouldn't be stupid enough to do it that
right,
way. um, and I
right.
think that they both turned to the shadow for motivations that were not selfish and evil in the first place. Whereas, like the
Right.
Forsaken, they just wanted power. They're very cartoonish villains. We kind of talked about it in a way. They're a little bit less interesting in their
Yeah.
motivations. You need big bad in an epic fantasy story like this, but you start to see that as the dominoes of the Forsaken fall, they're not even like the scariest type of dark friend. It's somebody like Varen who could have
Right.
been under your nose the whole time, or
Yeah.
Ingtar who
Yes.
really could have lost you the horn forever, those types of things. But what Varen and Ingtar both had were just kind of, I guess, sympathetic motivations to start with. And if they felt like there were any other paths in life that would satisfy those motivations, they would take those. It was not a desire to get anything that the shadow was really promising them. I think Ingtar was trying to do anything he could to make peace with a force that from what he understood, was going to overtake all of the world anyway, and the borderlands first. And he wanted to
Right.
be able to save some of his people. He wanted to negotiate with them. Varen,
Right. Right.
Varen thought she could do some good by studying them. Probably just a lot of curiosity, and then thought later that she could do some good with the book. But both of them, if they felt like there was a better way to do either of those things, they would have done it. And I
Right.
think
Right.
they got to see more corroboration of that with the Portal Stone
Right.
lifetimes. But if it had been different people who'd gone through those Portal Stones, they still may not have been affected by them in the same way.
Right. Oh, exactly. It was those two because, Taverin. I'm sorry. That's
Right.
my best loyal interpretation.
Yeah.
I can't do that deep a voice, but yeah, or I said interpretation, impersonation. My best loyal impersonation. I just can't do a voice that deep. But yeah, just the Taverin web brought up the two dark friends who could be changed. I think that was not the only thing, but I think that was a big catalyst in changing their story arc and bringing them back to the light.
Hmm.
And I just found that very comforting that it was because they saw some of the end results of their actions, and yeah, so let's do something better.